people are somewhere caught in the middle. They're not decentralized and censorship resistant, but they're kind of decentralized, and they're not like fully centralized either, but they don't follow any of the rules or the regulations. We are a centralized exchange, if you want to put it in those terms. I kind of reject the framing. I think we're a compliant exchange. Where we're looking to kind of fit into the mold of the various rules and regulations of all the kind of jurisdictions in which we serve users. We're just a very crypto native bunch, and we're looking to use all these techniques to build the best systems kind of from first principles that we can to build next generation financial technology.
Today's guest is Armani Ferrante, the Backpack and Mad Lads co-founder and CEO. Backpack is a Solana-based crypto exchange and wallet, while Mad Lads is an NFT community ecosystem project, bunch of other things. Armani has a great founder story. He has been in the space for a while, and I'm excited to talk to him for our first Solana Sessions series, which we're diving into with Solana founders who have been building in the space, from early stage ones to those who have been around, gotten through the trenches, and everything else in between. Armani, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Start off, I always like to ask guests, can you tell us a little bit about how you even got into the space?
Yeah. Okay, so where do I start?
Dial back.
So going back to 2017, I was sitting in, my shared office space at Apple, was working on, iOS, macOS, apps.
Wow.
And I distinctly remember one of my coworkers sitting in a Discord trading Bitcoin. And we had about an entire summer of this where the price just kept going up and up and up. And we both just kept looking at the chart being like, what the heck is going on? This is kind of crazy. And it really wasn't until I read the Ethereum white paper. I was sitting at a Phil's Coffee on Market Street in San Francisco over a weekend that I just ultimately kind of got nerd sniped and just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And just knew like pretty quickly that I wanted to just jump headfirst into it. I had no idea what that meant or where I would start. I just knew I had to like get out of my corporate job and jump into the crypto space. I just wanted to work on open source. I just wanted to like work in this really just vibrant and rich cultural kind of hub that was based all around the world. And as a young kind of engineer in San Francisco, it was just like the coolest thing ever. And so that's really where it started. And I think, done a lot since then, but I think it was really the Ethereum white paper that got me going.
Did you buy Bitcoin and Ethereum, I assume?
I bought Ethereum at the time.
You didn't buy Bitcoin?
I didn't buy Bitcoin at the time.
Damn.
It took me a long time.
That's usually the first step.
Yeah. It took me a long time to really appreciate like the Bitcoin story. But for me, I originally very much looked at it through the lens of like, this is just a cool systems problem. And I want to go work on this and go contribute to this and build in this space in any way, shape, or form was very much from that perspective, more so than the hard money point of view.
Right. So Ethereum to Solana, how'd you land in Solana?
Yeah. So, I mean, I, like many people in 2017, 2018, got really excited about Ethereum, but very quickly, everybody ran
Solana
into the
also
scaling
wasn't
problems.
around then,
That's right. It wasn't around then, but I think the scaling problem really took over the conversation and honestly continues to take over the conversation. But really at the time, Ethereum was, the price kept going up. People were building really cool stuff, but very quickly everybody realized gas prices were too high. The gas limit was too low, and we needed to work on scaling solutions. And so this is like when the L2 conversation really got going with like state channels and plasma and eventually the whole sharding roadmap that the Ethereum community went on. And I very quickly realized that there was other points in the design space that would be pretty interesting. And so I just went on this journey of looking for other L1 architectures. And so, that's kind of where it started. And then eventually fast forwarding to, I guess, 2020 was really when I got exposed to Solana. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah. Why create Backpack?
Yeah.
And then Mad Lads? Or which one came first?
Yeah. So
was that correct?
Yeah, that is right. Yeah.
I just guessed it.
So a lot of the motivation for me in the space was originally working on infrastructure. And when I came to Solana, worked on a lot of early stuff, early DeFi, early wallet tooling, a lot of developer tooling, really smart contract tooling. And once Solana started growing really quickly, and I felt like a lot of the infrastructure was really for the first time set on a really compelling path where I felt like these problems were going to be solved by people much smarter than myself. I really started to shift my focus to the application layer, which, right now it's kind of the whole meta, but back then I think it was maybe not super obvious. But when I kind of shifted my focus, I just knew that the next problems to solve were going to be great user experiences and bringing crypto into the real world, to the masses, however you want to frame it. And so the starting point for that is ultimately a wallet. You always need a seed phrase or a key pair to interact with anything on chain. Self-custody, I would argue, is the single most important thing in crypto. It's kind of the main reason why all this technology exists and why we're here. And so that was really just the starting point of, okay, I want to build consumer applications. Where do I start? A wallet seemed like the best starting point.
So yeah, Backpack was a wallet. Then there's the exchange, right? And I feel like those are two areas that it's very hard to tap into maybe today. I see a lot of wallets kind of launching and then they kind of fizzle out. Maybe you don't hear from them again. How do you think you kind of caught the fire, so to speak, and really built something from scratch where maybe there were already wallets out there?
Yeah, I mean, on the wallet side, the original motivation was this concept that we called XNFTs. We since have more or less pivoted away from it.
I do remember that. XNFTs, yeah.
Yeah. At the time, the thinking was really, well, instead of tokenizing images, we can tokenize code and build a whole application around that. And that's kind of what segued into the Mad Lads saga. It's how we did the whole Mint experience. And it was the thing that got us really excited. But that was our wedge. And it wasn't until the FTX collapse that we really had to stop and reevaluate what we were doing. We had lost 88% of our operating capital on the exchange. We ran out of runway. The company was dead for all intents and purposes. There was really no sensible reason to keep going.
How did you keep it going then?
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't have, is the answer. Right. But I felt like it was like a defining moment for so many people. Certainly a defining moment for Solana. And I've just felt like it was a defining moment for me and the company. And ultimately, you're the type of person that either forges through those types of situations, or you're the type of person that gives up in those situations. And it doesn't matter how big or small the situation is. The way you react is more or less consistent. And so that was kind of just my, I guess, the way I looked at it. And so just decided to keep going. And, we eventually did Mad Lads. That was really successful. And, we really stopped and reevaluated what was happening in the world and what was happening in crypto and what were the opportunities and what our business was and what we should really be focusing on.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a lot of people saw the exchange opportunity the moment FTX collapsed and thought, oh, I'm going to go build the next great exchange and fill that hole in the market. That was not my first reaction. I'm not a crazy person. I know I know just how difficult building exchanges are. Before we even did it, but it wasn't really until I spoke with now one of the co-founders of the exchange, Ken, that I felt like we could actually do it. Like I'm an engineer, right. I'm a product person. I feel like I'm pretty good or reasonable with distribution and marketing. I'm not like a compliance person. I'm not a lawyer. I had no prior experience in that. I felt like I could build an exchange no problem, but I felt like that was, I mean, from my perspective, the easy part.
Right. But there's frameworks you have to operate within.
Exactly. Yeah. And I felt like that was really the big unlock that gave me the confidence to say to me and ourselves and to build a team where we could actually go and do this and do it at a global scale and do it in a way that makes sense and that fills a legitimate kind of I guess, like hole in the market, because you stop and you ask yourself, how many like crypto native exchanges that are really good at product are also pushing the envelope and building a financial institution that can not only operate in crypto, but operate in traditional finance and really fulfill this story of bringing kind of crypto to, mainstream consumer finance.
Yeah.
And the answer is there's really not that many that are doing this. It's like, it might sound crazy, but if you stop and think about it, it's just a really, really a hard problem. And I think, if you stop and you ask yourself, what does crypto look like in 10 years? What does it look like in 20 years? What is the end state of all of this? You basically come into two conclusions. On the one hand, crypto is this, small, mostly irrelevant part of the global economy. It's where we are today. Where,
hey now.
well, all the value of crypto is less than.
I do get it. It's like kind of a bubble that we exist in. And there's like trillions of dollars of value in it, but it's like trillions in what grand scheme?
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful cultural hub that we all love, but the zinger is that all the value in crypto is less than the entire market cap in NVIDIA. And that really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
And what we're doing today is a glimpse of the future, but it's not there. And so that's one version of the future where it's mostly, unregulated. Most, the large institutions don't touch it. It's not part of our day-to-day lives. It's not mainstream by any kind of meaningful definition of the term. But then there's another version of the future, which I think is the thing that gets us all excited, the thing that we're all inspired to build towards every day, which is to say that I think a lot of us think that crypto will eat finance in the same way that software ate the entire world. And that, this whole conversation of DeFi versus CeFi is, a momentary thing, and that ultimately we'll just think of it all as finance. And let's go build for that world. And what are the actual primitives and companies and pieces of technology that we need to actually get to that future? And I think ultimately that is what we're trying to do with the exchange and why we're doing everything that we're doing, and really the thing that motivates us and gives us purpose and a reason to take this path. And so there's kind of both versions of the future, but one is very clearly the one that we should be building towards.
You talked about how when you lost about 88% of your operating capital, most founders would probably just give up, and that would make sense. But maybe, in a crazy way, you saw something or felt something in the moment where you were like, no, we're going to find a way through. What was that? Like, what was that process? If you could think back to those moments where you just didn't want to like throw in the towel or start something new, but you kept with it. And then not only did you keep with it, you then expanded on it and built it into what it is today.
I wouldn't say it was like anything particularly worth writing about. It was very simple. I was on a flight from Breakpoint in Lisbon to I guess it was to Miami, and I remember seeing the whole kind of saga unfold on Twitter, and I just like remember I was like walking off the flight and going to customs to get back into the US, and it was just like really simple. It's like fight or flight mode. It's just, I remember like I was looking at Twitter and like I saw some like tweet, I think it was like about Solana and people were like, oh, is there, Solana's dead or what's left at this point? And it was like, at that point that I remember like tweeted something and I was like, this is it. Like decision made, like fight or flight mode. That's it. It's as simple as that. And we're just not even going to think about it. We're just going to keep going. And there's like no time or opportunity to reflect or to stop and get to question oneself. It's just like you just go. And it was really just as simple as that.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like some decisions in life are just, I was in the moment and I had to act. And and you guys acted that way, right? On the Solana front, though, everyone was saying Solana's dead. Yeah. I was one of the people who was not on that camp. We saw the price dropping. People were all upset about maybe the relationship between SBF and FTX and Solana, all these other narratives that were popping up out there. What made you want to stay on Solana? Because like looking at today, present day, it's like, oh, we made the best choice. We're on Solana. Yeah. But like back then it wasn't a win to stay on it, you know, especially when people are like kicking it while it was down.
I think there's a couple things that went into that decision. So I think firstly, it was just like blatantly obvious that this thing had to exist. If you just look at it from a pure engineering point of view, this is a really important system design that somebody has to go build, and that somebody will build, and the person that builds this and and operates at scale will do really well. Like the world just needs this.
Solana.
Solana. Okay. Solana. And I mean, that's the thing that originally got me excited about Solana. I was like, this is the correct answer. Like, or at least one of the many correct answers that must exist. And I think, there was this price dislocation with the collapse of FTX where, I mean, there was just so much just nonsensical fake news, to use that term, about Solana at the time. People were like, oh, SBF has an off button, it's his chain or whatever. Right. And it's like, I was in a really unique situation where like, I was kind of in between both worlds. So for context, I was hired in 2020 by Alameda to work on Solana projects. So I didn't work on the trading systems back then. I didn't work on the exchange. I was literally working on Solana open source protocols. And so I was like close enough to FTX to like kind of, see it from like my like remote perspective. But I worked very closely with the entire Solana ecosystem. And so it was very easy for me to like distinguish like what was real and what was fake. And the large majority of the news around Solana was just totally nonsensical at the time. It was just like, just hysteria and honestly a lesson in terms of like how the world interprets information and how dislocated from reality it can get. And so there was just huge price dislocation where, it went down to $8 and there was that famous Vitalik tweet that, marked the bottom or whatever. But I firmly believe that, price converges to value over a sufficiently long period of time. And the value of Solana purely from an engineering point of view cannot have been more clear. And so if you think about it very simply, which is to say that, okay, does crypto matter? Yes or no? And the answer is like, okay, yes, I think crypto matters. I'm working in this industry. I'm going to continue to work in this industry. Then if crypto matters, does scaling a smart contract execution environment matter? Yes or no? And the answer is like clearly yes. Then the question is, well, who's doing that and who has the highest probability of doing that at scale in a way that creates a ton of economic value for the world? And the answer then was very clearly Solana was, way further along than anybody else in spite of this whole FTX debacle. And, putting on top all of this, just all of the social capital that was just built on top of the network at that time. Really, it was just like all the teams, all the provenance, like all the culture, it sounds silly, but all the vibes and the friendships and the trust that was built up from all of these kind of crazy people all around the world. Like all of that was very real. Yeah. And you cannot look at me and say that like that was not real. And that there wasn't an enormous amount of talent building just incredible things, irrespective of what was happening with the FTX fraud. And so from my point of view, like, at the time it might have seemed, contrarian, but it was just so obvious to me that this thing was going to not go anywhere. If anything, it would be a liberating moment, a crucible moment where its soul was really forged in that moment. And I think after that, I guess Saga, it kind of hit escape velocity and now is kind of in a tier of its own that is only shared by, I suppose, Ethereum and to, even a larger extent, Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think good tech is a reason for people to stay, but a community is a reason for it to thrive. And like, if you have people talking about your technology or the chain, like it's gonna proliferate and grow, right? And so I think to that point, it makes a lot of sense that Solana did kind of survive that era or whatever we want to call it and kind of grew into what it is today. From your perspective, when it comes to your founder journey, I don't think it's the most common one, right? Would you agree with that? I think a lot of people have ups and downs, but you had a very specific situation.
Yeah.
How would you kind of characterize it, and like what has surprised you the most in terms of like the growth from point A to, let's say, point B or C where we are today? Remember trying to move your assets between chains, watching the minutes tick by, wondering if your transaction would make it? Yeah, we've all been there. But here's the thing. While other bridges feel like taking the scenic route, Across is your express lane. Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, boom, boom, boom. Your assets move between them faster than you could say cross-chain. Across isn't just another bridge. When Uniswap needed the fastest, most reliable way to move assets cross-chain, they chose Across. Now millions of Uniswap users are swapping between chains without even thinking about it, because that's how it should be. Whether you're moving assets yourself or building the next big thing in crypto, Across makes cross-chain feel like the same chain. No more scenic routes, no more complexity, just 2-second transfers between chains. Ready to join the express lane? Head to across.to and experience what bridging should have been all along.
I think it's when you get into like the details of any individual founder journey, it seems like almost like just like shocking, just how ridiculous the journey is.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's tempting to want to like think of oneself as unique or special or whatever. But then you like hear the stories of everybody else, and you just like look at the stuff that they go through.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to like gaslight oneself and think, oh my God, all this crazy stuff's happening to me. Why is this happening to me? It's ridiculous. It's unfair. I give up. But then you very quickly realize that it sounds silly, but it's like totally normal. Mm-hmm. And that gives a ton of comfort to like anchor oneself and like, I'm not like going through this weird thing. And like, actually I can forge ahead and get through whatever challenge that comes my way, because that's what everybody has to go through. It doesn't matter who you are. All of the, every founder, no matter how big the business or how small the business, whether it's a big tech company like Apple or Tesla, or it's a small liquor store, everybody deals with this same level of just ridiculousness, I suppose, and suffering. It's like the famous Jensen Huang, you have to have a high pain tolerance if you want to do this. And I think that's 100% true. And so I think, there's definitely been tons of pain and suffering in the backpack journey, but it's no different than all the pain and suffering of every other founder. And that's what you sign up for. And I think a lot of people would not choose the journey if they knew it beforehand. But that's the way it goes. And that's kind of those are the defining aspects of taking that path, I suppose.
You have to be passionate about it to do it.
Yeah.
Money's not enough.
That's right. Yeah.
I think you would lose it. There's a lot of crypto exchanges out there, and there are centralized exchanges and then decentralized exchanges, which we could call sexes versus dexes. How do you kind of characterize or view the two categories?
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes people pull them together, or they'll say like a centralized exchange is like Coinbase, Kraken, etc., and then decentralized. We've got like Uniswap, Backpack, etc. Pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah. Great question. So I reject the framing, which is like a very common framing, which is like this decentralized exchange versus centralized exchange. The reason why I dislike it is because it's coming at it from like an architectural point of view, like an engineering point of view, like how are these things built? And I think the framing that I prefer is, is censorship resistance versus compliance. And you have to pick which path you choose. It's like compliance is censorable by design. It's like you have to follow the rules, the regulations, the laws, and wherever you're serving countries. And censorship resistance means you have so many globally distributed validators and operators of whatever you're building all around the world that it literally is like an undefined problem to follow any specific rule and regulation, because it's just quite literally impossible. It's like applying a rule or applying a law to like the Pacific Ocean, right? And the thing only works because it's credibly neutral and because it's censorship resistant and decentralized. And that's kind of what makes decentralized protocol special, is the credible neutrality. And so when talking about centralized exchanges versus decentralized exchanges, we can talk about, okay, what is a prudent way to build these systems so that we can minimize the probability of attack, of fraud, of just error more broadly. And it turns out a lot of the way centralized exchanges should be built are with the techniques of decentralized exchanges. And I think that's where Backpack comes into it, right? I think maybe going back to FTX as an example, a lot of people look at FTX as an example of the perils of crypto. But in fact, it's the exact opposite. FTX is an example of the perils of bad system design, where you have this, a long history of financial collapses, not just in crypto, but just throughout all of traditional finance, right? It's because everything's opaque. Everything's brittle. You don't have cryptography proving things. You don't have any type of externally validatable trust minimization, right? You can't go and like prove that this ledger is correct by virtue of like the construction and the math, right? But you can't do that with crypto, and you can do it whether it's a centralized exchange or a decentralized exchange. That's just an implementation detail. And so it's my view that in the limit, if the world, I suppose, makes sense and continuously improves, that we will continue to build better and better financial technology by just applying cryptography to traditional finance, and that's squarely that's squarely where Backpack Exchange lies. So we are a centralized exchange, if you want to put it in those terms, but I kind of reject the framing. I think we're a compliant exchange, where we're looking to kind of fit into the mold of the various rules and regulations of all the kind of jurisdictions in which we serve users. We're just a very crypto native bunch, and we're looking to use all these techniques to build the best systems kind of from first principles that we can to build next generation financial technology. And so I think that's the kind of the angle that we come at it from. And the challenge, I think, and I think where a lot of the discourse goes wrong just in the industry, is people are somewhere caught in the middle, where they're not decentralized and censorship resistant, but they're kind of decentralized, and they're not like fully centralized either, but they don't follow any of the rules or the regulations. And I think that's kind of where the discourse becomes unproductive, because people just call themselves a decentralized exchange. And it's like, well, no, you're not censorship resistant. Ergo, you're not actually a decentralized exchange. And I think that is kind of maybe where people go wrong when having this discussion. And so, I ultimately believe that you have to have one of those two properties. You have to be fully compliant, or you have to be so censorship resistant that compliance is just an undefined problem. It doesn't make sense. And if you're anywhere in the middle, you're kind of on a path to nowhere.
Yeah, I was going to ask what happens to the middle group. Like, do they get shaken out, or they have to fall into one of the buckets?
I think ultimately, if you want to reach scale where like this is a pillar of the world, you have to fall into one of those two buckets. If you're not fully decentralized, you're not credibly neutral, then you're not, like, the world isn't going to use you. Like, I think maybe a nice metaphor for this is something like I was mentioning in the ocean earlier. It's like the Pacific Ocean, right? You can imagine if it's all about control, right? So when you're talking about censorship resistant, is there like a party that controls this thing? And can I shut that party down? And so you can imagine something like the Pacific Ocean, where if the U.S. controlled like the Pacific Ocean, then maybe China wouldn't, be using the Pacific Ocean for trade or whatever. Or if China did it, maybe Japan or the U.S. wouldn't be doing it. But nobody really controls the Pacific Ocean.
I was gonna say you can't shut down the Pacific Ocean.
You can't shut down the Pacific Ocean, right? It's just it's credibly neutral. Sure, there's like maybe different nation states that kind of have their aircraft carriers or whatever. But we're all kind of generally comfortable doing trade and commerce across something that credibly neutral. And blockchains and decentralized protocols they're kind of like data oceans, right? And it only works if it's genuinely credibly neutral. So like China will only like use a blockchain if it thinks that the US doesn't control it, and Europe will only use it if it thinks the US doesn't control it, and so on and so forth, right? It doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter what your politics are. It's just this credibly neutral thing that we can all collectively use. And that's that global coordination that is the big unlock for the world, and why these public ledgers are so interesting and novel, and why they just genuinely bring something new to the world in a way that really, traditional markets can never do.
Can you see them converging in a way where it can be compliant but also decentralized?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just look at the internet, right? There's tons of crazy things that happen on the internet, tons of illegal activity, but nobody looks at the internet and says, oh my God, I can't believe, pick your favorite kind of illegal activity that happens on the internet. I can't believe that happens there, right? Which is kind of funny when you see it.
Maybe back in the early days. I remember there was the internet talk, but today, yes.
Yeah, it's like, pirating software or, the dark web or pick your favorite, narrative, which is kind of funny because you see this kind of play out again now, especially like most recently in Solana with, like all, the meme coins and the various pump and dumps that have happened. It's like, yes, that's indisputably very bad, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's like not Solana's fault, right? Solana is just like the internet. It's just
free market.
It's a free market, right? Yeah. It's censorship resistant, right? So when you're saying that, Solana is bad, what you're actually saying is it's so decentralized and censorship resistant that these bad things can happen. And then in the same way that you don't like blame the internet, you shouldn't blame a credibly neutral blockchain either.
I agree. When it comes to operations for you, I feel like we've talked about a lot of things here, and there's a lot of noise in crypto, as you know. How do you kind of sift through the noise and focus on growth metrics? What really moves the needle for Backpack and Mad Lads? Like when you look at, let's say, last year, how do you measure if it was a good year or not in terms of growth?
Yeah, I mean, there's several KPIs that we look at, and I think that's all the traditional startup stuff that you might imagine as applied to an exchange and as applied to a wallet. Putting all that stuff aside, I don't view ourselves as an exchange. I don't view ourselves as a wallet. I don't view ourselves as an NFT. We're none of those things. What do you view yourself as? Those are products, right? We're ultimately a trust company. What we sell is trust, and it's not just a brand and a logo. It's like deserved trust. Yeah. And so the question I constantly ask myself is, are we deserving the world's trust? And that comes in, a number of different ways, right? It comes from, compliance. It comes from, and really important engineering work and trust minimization. It comes from marketing and I guess doing podcasts like this. It comes to listening to your users and building relationships with them, and just genuinely trying to do the right thing. But I think that is like the most important thing with respect to, are we making progress? It's especially, as we came off of the back of this really just, I guess dark, for lack of a better word, place that crypto was in, where, the whole world thought it was a scam. There was the anti-crypto army or whatever.
Still exists, but it feels better today. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I talk about this a bunch, but there's so many people devoting their lives to this, that it's like, this is like not only their livelihood, but also like their purpose for like, waking up every day and spending their skills, and their life really, doing this stuff. And so I think, making like a good name for the industry and like solving real problems and fighting against this meme, for better or worse, of like the whole industry is like, a scam or whatever. And there's all these like, bad things happening. That's how I think mostly measure progress. And I think, there's been a ton on that front, both just externally validating kind of the industry with the new administration, but also like, within Backpack and just like taking one day at a time and just, trying to deserve people's trust and always building great products and, solving hard problems. So I think that's probably the most important thing. And in addition to all the normal, I guess, startup stuff that you might talk about.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think calling it a trust company is very interesting because trust, especially when like money and financial products are involved, is very hard to gain and also very, very easy to lose. And I talk about this sometimes in personal conversations where it's like, you need to make sure that the reputation and the brand that you put out there is factually based, honest, and true to who you are, because otherwise people will see through it and or not trust you again. And they're like, it's so hard to regain that trust, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard.
I think humans are ultimately very good bullshit detectors. Like there's plenty of examples of people that were able to like bypass people's bullshit detectors. But in aggregate, humans are so terrific at looking at somebody, listening to them, and knowing if that what they're saying is internally consistent with what they actually believe. And I think this is one of the really interesting, I guess, phenomenons of like successful crypto native companies is that, you talk about, traditional startups and solving problems for people, but there's this whole other aspect of like crypto, which is like that social layer. And like, you just kind of described it as community, but it's ultimately like looking at somebody and saying to themselves, like, do I trust this person? Am I going to be like on this journey with them as they build in public? And with me as the user, having some type of shared ownership of that journey. And that's like a very unique relationship and dynamic that's pretty special and specific to crypto that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And it's, I think, one of the reasons why you see a lot of, larger companies come into this space. You saw this with NFTs, for example, and just like kind of, they look at it as kind of a cash opportunity and a way to make money or whatever. It's like some new market, but they don't actually stop and care about the people involved. And that comes out in their behavior and their actions. Very extractive,
yeah.
And so I think that internal belief and dialogue emerges through kind of one's actions and it's picked up upon. And I think it's one of the most important things in addition to, all the traditional kind of, stuff that you might do in normal startups.
Yeah. I know you also tweeted recently about single cycle burnout. When I read that, I was like, that is such a perfect way to describe what people go through, where it's like they enter to make money and they exit either making money, good for them, or they got burned.
Yeah.
How do you get people to stay?
Yeah.
Maybe that's like the $1 million answer, or question. Do you hate your PR firm? Then listen up, because this ad is for you. This episode is sponsored by 72B, a boutique public affairs firm founded by a former Coinbase comms manager. If you're sick of your toxic relationship with your public relations firm, break up with your agency and get better issue positioning, executive profile building, and more with 72B. Check them out at 72b.io.
I mean, I think it's tempting to want to like find the right people and put the onus on the individual. And, there is some level of that. And, finding amazing people is important. But I think ultimately the incentive structure is the most important thing, right? You show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And I think part of the problem that we've seen with the industry more broadly is just like a broken incentive structure to create good outcomes for the world. I think it's fair to say that Silicon Valley mostly figured this out. Like the whole pipeline of like, seed to Series A to, going through all the phases and going public,
stages,
and you have like different people along the way and different founders networks and different venture capitalists. I'll give you different pieces of advice and kind of help you on that journey to build a long, sustainable company that is a pillar of the world and that we live in. I think they've mostly figured it out. And on the other hand, you look at crypto, you kind of see a very different structure, right? You see people, raising token rounds at much larger valuations, mainly because you get a premium for early liquidity, and you do this token after building for a year, or maybe before even building at all. Maybe you do the token immediately. Maybe you did an ICO if you want to go back to the 2017 and you just wrote a white paper and you raise $100 million. Or you do an NFT project and you don't build anything at all and you just sell a bunch of promises to the world and you make a couple $1 million there. But the global capital formation, the global and permissionless capital formation is on the one hand such a superpower because you get access to like global markets, but on the other hand it's a handicap, and can create an incentive structure that creates these short-lived outcomes. And so you see plenty of people get very wealthy, but without actually, these fundamental contributions to the world, where, in Silicon Valley, sure, there's like, maybe people that get lucky occasionally and their company gets acquired and doesn't actually do much.
Grind for it.
But by and large, you have to work for a very long period of time and make a significant contribution to the world in order to actually get the outcomes that you would get in, the early kind of Wild West days of crypto. And I think this is not necessarily fundamentally like unsolvable, but it is, a snapshot of the point in time that we're at in the industry, and something that I think most of us believe is very solvable. You just need to create the right kind of, market structure and systems to encourage people to take the long road and to, build these like lifetime companies that, make significant contributions to the world.
Yeah. So what is your trust company? I'm going to start calling it that, trust company, doing to kind of prioritize this narrative and make people be more long-term thinking? Maybe this year, looking beyond that.
I think there's a couple things. So I think firstly, like company culture is like a really important thing. I think with exchanges in particular, they are notorious for, I don't want to sound too harsh, but kind of notorious for corruption. You see this with, NFT marketplaces. You see it with centralized crypto exchanges, but having dynamics where, people in the companies, whether it's executive teams or people that are working in particular roles, can make, decisions that are good for them, but maybe not so great for kind of the user or for the company at large. It's like there's just hasn't been a lot of maturity, I think, in terms of just corporate structure and dynamics, which I think is like really important. And it's like these things are so simple, right? It's like don't be corrupt, right? But it's like, well, somebody's actually got to like say those things, right? And create that environment so that you don't put like a good person in a bad situation and they make a bad decision or whatever.
You think a lot of teams are corrupt in this space? No.
I think there's historically been a lot of I think like maybe a good example of this is like, I don't remember the exact details of the case, but like, I think there was like that OpenSea example of, not to throw OpenSea under the bus or anything like that, but of like, it was like an executive or somebody on the team that would like front run the
so it's like
NFT
corrupt individuals within a system. Yeah, right. I get that.
And like the problem is that you get very wealthy from doing that, instead of getting very wealthy from creating a great company that that contributes to the world. Yeah. And it's that dynamic that I'm really referring to. And so I think that's like, at least in part of the problem. And there's plenty of examples of this. But I think it ultimately just comes down to incentives.
Yeah. For Backpack and Mad Lads, looking at the rest of 2025, we're a couple months in, what are like the big goals for you guys? What do you really want to accomplish this year?
So I think there's been a couple mountains that we've been climbing. So I think the first mountain that we've climbed was really the most important one, which is like really getting to the starting point to be able to serve users all around the world. I think the big difference between Backpack and a lot of other crypto projects is that we're trying to build ultimately a regulated business. Building a regulated business is very different than building an unregulated business. I mean, a simple example of this is just going to market here in the US. I'm an American. I've spent my entire life here, basically. My family's here. I care about the US as much as one possibly could. And even like in New York, where we're sitting right now, we cannot, hire anybody here that has access to our production systems.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I don't want to like be overly critical or anything like that, but it expresses maybe the unique challenges that you have building a regulated company. And we can't just like go willy-nilly serve folks in the US. And so just getting to the starting line where you climb that, it's kind of an enormous barrier to entry, to be honest, where I just want to get to the starting line so I can compete, right? And so I think that doing that all around the world has been a big challenge. I think we've more or less have a clear path to get to the top of that mountain. I'm pretty proud of the work that the team has done, but I think that has been a big part of the story up until now, which you don't see. It's not the sexiest thing in the world. It's very hard to appreciate, especially since most companies in the space don't actually take that path. But that's a mountain that we've been climbing. The second one is just product, where it's on the one hand quite easy to build an exchange and a wallet, but on the other hand, it's quite hard to build an exchange and a wallet responsibly, where where it's safe, it's secure. You know exactly where all the money is down to the decimal. You've taken no shortcuts. You can ask me any question about either product, and I can give you any answer. And I'm happy to or I'm proud to say that, right? Because we've just taken no shortcut there. And so I think doing that and doing that right has been really important for us. And that takes an enormous amount of time. And I think the big difference between building a crypto company and building like a social network, for example, is like, okay, if you're building Facebook, you can move back fast and break things. Like, who cares if the like counter's off, or who cares if like the comment like goes to the wrong picture or whatever. Versus if you're holding people's money, people care a lot. That's like life or death for people. It's like real consequences if you screw that up. And so it's much more analogous to building like a rocket ship or something like that. Not to like say it's the same, but the seriousness it certainly is. Obviously, building rocket science is a whole. You don't
want the
world.
Rocket ship to blow up. You want it to get from point A to the moon easily. And land.
I would even. If you're launching a rocket into space, it's actually okay if it blows up in some sense, right? Like SpaceX is fine, even though it's had plenty of rockets blow up, right? Your company is more or less dead if your rocket blows up in crypto, and so there's very, very little tolerance for failure as a result.
Do you see opportunity to get into the U.S. market?
Absolutely. So. Even before the election results were concluded, we were gung-ho on making inroads into the U.S. With the wallet, it's we have plenty of the folks here, but with the exchange, we kind of, made the decision to first start outside of the U.S. So we originally started in Dubai and got licensed, there out in the UAE. More recently, we went to Tokyo, and I live in Japan currently, and we're going through the process there, and most recently, going through the process in Europe and acquiring FTX EU. But all the meanwhile, we have our US team. We're going after all 50 states, and it's kind of like a thread that's kind of spun off in the background, because it does take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy. It's not something where you can just like quickly like build a product and then go serve it to folks in New York. There's a lot more to it. And so we will absolutely go to the US, and it's like just really important for me, maybe, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in New York all the time. And so I I feel like expansion into the US is super important, and like hopefully that works out. Last 2 questions. What is WOW? WAO. What is WOW?
Yeah. So
because I know when we post this, there's going to be comments that say WOW.
That's right.
What does it mean?
So it's just a bit of a silly a cult mantra, if you want to put it in those terms. So for context, for folks that aren't aware of the Mad Lads, so Mad Lads is one of these kind of silly and ridiculous NFT communities. It's this art project of 10,000 profile pics made up of just this
dapper men.
Enormously like rambunctious and passionate group of people all around the world. And WOW simply stands for, it's WAO. We are one.
Yes.
And it's this kind of beautiful, I think, I guess, symbolism of like, a single community. We're all in this together. Anything that, we do, we kind of do together strongly. And I think that's a nice, I guess, mantra for a community of people all around the world.
Yeah, I like that. Last thing, Armani, we always ask our guests, can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry?
I think it's really tempting to be in this industry, and you look around and you see, prices going up, prices going down. You see crazy articles in like mainstream media saying things like, everybody's getting rich, except for you or whatever.
Yes.
You see an enormous amount of wealth creation and value creation. And it's super easy to kind of get caught up in all that. It's super easy to get caught up in wanting to do well and do well now. This is my, I guess, 3rd crypto market cycle at this point. And I think the biggest piece of advice is a piece of advice shared with me by a friend that, I wholeheartedly believe with every bone in my body, which is that you don't have to win over a single cycle. Your job in crypto is to not die and to stay kind of in it for, the long run. And don't win over one cycle. You can liberate yourself from that constraint and instead give yourself permission to win over many cycles. And, if you do things, and you do it the right way for a sufficiently long period of time, things will ultimately kind of work out in the end. And so I think that is probably the most important and simplest piece of advice that you might hear and you might read in books, and you might think, oh, that's so obvious and silly and dumb or whatever, like, of course, or whatever. But every day and every moment you are presented with so many opportunities to take shortcuts, no matter what you're doing in this space. And, I think eventually those shortcuts, catch up with you. And so if I had to give one piece of advice, I would say to free yourself from that, and to, think in terms of multiple cycles, and to be in it for the long run, and, to work hard over a long period of time, and everything will more or less work out in the end.
Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Armani, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.